Hello, thank you so much for joining Building a Better America Small Business Resource Community. We're going to give everyone a couple of moments to get here. We're so excited for this webinar today as we are focusing on Indigenous, Tribal, Native small businesses today. So thank you so much for joining us. Hello again. Thank you all so much for joining. We see you joining from all over the country. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some dynamic panelists today. We're so excited. It's a good time to be here to find about some resources for your businesses. We're going to get started in a quick moment. We're just going to let a few more people in. I know it sounds like we're having an actual room open, but we have our virtual door open and the people are filing in. All right, we're going to get started. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Renee Johnson, and I am a senior advisor here at Public-Private Strategies. And we want to welcome you today to Building a Better America Small Business Resource Community. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to do a little housekeeping before we get started today. If you have any questions, please type it into the Q&A function. The chat function is disabled. Additionally, with that, please do not send any private information, any personal information that includes social security numbers, phone numbers, contract numbers, anything like that. Unfortunately, this webinar does not address anyone's personal issues, but we're here to provide an overall assistance for small business needs. Additionally, the U.S. Small Business Administration does not endorse Public-Private Strategies Institute. The session is being live streamed and recorded, and it'll be on Facebook Live on the SBA and PPSI Facebook pages. And again, do not share your personal information. Now let's go into that next slide where my name again is Renee Johnson. I'm Senior Advisor here at Public-Private Strategies, and we're so excited for you to join us today. This is part of a series that we are doing. Go to the next slide. Of webinars where we're going to talk about what Building a Better America is all about. Today's goal is to connect small businesses with critical resources and information, including how the bipartisan infrastructure law, the American Rescue Plan, and how Made in America may provide opportunities to help your small businesses thrive. These briefings are going to highlight steps you could take to learn how to take advantage of existing programs, updates regarding programs and recent policy announcements, and then a discussion of important timely policy issues, including paid leave, tax credits, access to affordable healthcare, childcare, hiring and retaining workers, and then healthcare access and cost. But we're going to first start with a conversation with ASIA Brian Newland and the amazing Paulie Rivera. We're going to talk about ASIA Newland. Mr. Newland is is an enrolled member of Bay Mills Indian Community, federally recognized Chippewa tribe in Michigan. Is the 14th Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at the Department of Interior. He was confirmed by the United States Senate on August 7th, 2021, and officially sworn into office on August 25th, 2021. A ceremony was swearing in by the Interior Secretary Deb Haaland was held on September 8th, 2021. The Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs assists the Secretary of the Interior in fulfilling the department's trust responsibilities to American Indian and Alaskan Native tribes and individuals. This post was established in the 1970s. And then a little bit about Paulie Rivera. He's the Senior Advisor and Tribal Affairs Director at the White House of Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Paulie Rivera serves as a Senior Advisor to the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, and the Director of Tribal Affairs for the Biden-Harris administration. Prior to his appointment, Rivera served as the Western Coalition's Director for the Biden-Harris presidential campaign. Without further ado, introducing these two amazing panelists.
Great to meet you, Renee, and thank you so much to everyone for joining today. I think a privilege to be able to speak with you, and of course, be able to join my good friend, Assistant Secretary Brian Newland, hailing from the great state of Michigan, and a former tribal leader of not only a member of the Bay Males Indian community, but a former tribal leader. So, wanting to make sure to give him that recognition. And Assistant Secretary, thanks so much for joining today. I think we have a pretty diverse audience today, so I'd love if you could just talk a little bit about your role, not only as the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but within the Department of Interior. And I think, obviously we have the tremendous leadership of Deb Holland, and very excited to see two natives being able to lead the agency in the way that you do. So would love if you could just talk a little bit about your role and the work that you also do with small businesses.
Which, thank you, Paulie. It's great to see you and to be here with you as well. My job is really interesting here at the department. When you just read the title or the name Indian Affairs, it might sound like it's a really narrowly focused bureaucratic agency. And if that's your assumption, you'd be wrong. Because what we do here at the Department of the Interior is cover almost the entire gamut of services the entire federal government provides. But then we, except for healthcare, and then we apply that and do that in conjunction with 576 federally recognized tribes across the United States, and many more individual Indian landowners and people on Indian lands. So some of those tribes are as diverse as Navajo Nation and Cherokee Nation, which have over 500,000 tribal citizens each, and then some tribes as small as a dozen tribal citizens and everywhere in between. And we do things like law enforcement, education, environmental compliance, land use, economic development, energy development, pretty much anything that any government, state or federal government does, we do that, but in that context. So it's really complex and dynamic. So my day, probably as you might know, involves sometimes meeting with tribal leaders to discuss law enforcement issues in their communities, building a jail, improving policing, supporting tribal courts. And then I might go from there into a meeting with a tribe that's proposing to develop a $100 million gaming facility, and then go from there to talk with folks in our Office of Indian Economic Development about how do we promote individual Indian-owned businesses in tribal communities. And so it's really diverse and complex, but it also makes it fun.
Thanks so much, Brian. And I know we're privileged to have your time today and meeting with tribal leaders on a day-to-day basis. You have a great understanding of the needs of tribal communities and also from your own personal background. When it comes to small businesses and Native communities, what are your top priorities? What are the priorities of the Bureau of Indian Affairs? And also, what are some of the ways that you're working with other agencies who you work closely with in terms of economic development and small business in Indian country?
Well, there's a number of things that we're doing on that front. One of the biggest forms of job creation and economic development in Indian country is agriculture. And so we always want to partner with our friends at USDA and individuals on things like leasing and grazing and supporting agriculture. We've taken steps in concert with Indian Health Service to modernize our authority under the Buy Indian Act. The Buy Indian Act gives us procurement authority directly with individual Indian-owned businesses and tribally owned businesses across Indian country. As folks here know, the federal government is the largest purchaser of goods in the country, and we have a unique legal relationship between the United States and tribes and Indian people, and so we've modernized those regulations to make it easier for us to do procurement directly with individual Indian-owned businesses. We've also, for more than 40 years, operated the Indian Loan Guarantee Program, which supports people developing businesses, not only in tribal communities, but Indian-owned businesses across the country that need help accessing capital, and we've been having great conversations with the Small Business Administration, the CDFI Fund, Treasury, Department of Energy on doing a better job of coordinating our access to capital work across the government. And then we have the Native American Business Development Institute, which provides grants and technical assistance on a competitive basis for tribes and tribal entities that are looking for consultants that can do feasibility studies, development of business plans, and identifying economic opportunities. So we do a lot in this area.
Thank you so much, Brian. And one thing that I think is important is for folks to understand, how to engage with Indian country, how to work with Indian country. Do you have any advice in terms of helping to share more about tribal governments and tribal nations in general? And then I think people would be interested in learning more how they can stay on top of the work that you're doing with the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Wow, that's a lot to pack in that question. In terms of working with tribes, tribes are I think the number one thing that I wish people understood is tribes are very diverse. And no two tribes are exactly the same. So, some tribes operate their businesses directly under their elected tribal governments. Some tribes have chartered corporations and other business entities with holding companies and sub-entities and have become very sophisticated business operators. And so tribes get a lot of proposals for business ideas and have really become sophisticated in vetting those and selecting business partners. And tribes have also become major purchasers and economic engines in their own communities. And so what I would tell people is be respectful of whatever tribe you're working with. Just because you did a deal with one tribe in a different place doesn't mean that tribe is going to just assume that what you're selling would work for them. But also make sure you understand that tribes are governments, sovereign governments, and they have their own laws that apply to the government and also to people doing business with the tribe. And to make sure you're approaching that in a respectful way. In terms of us, you can find our Office of Indian Economic Development on our BI website. We have social media accounts across the board, and we regularly try to publish and make folks aware of notice of funding opportunities and grant cycles. When our Indian Loan Guarantee Program has opportunities available, and of course the old-fashioned way of calling us up and talking to our folks on the phone, and we work really hard to try to serve the people we're tasked with serving.
Thank you, Brian. And I know we only had you for a short amount of time, so trying to squeeze as much as I could of you to receive that wisdom. But just want to thank you for taking a few moments of your very busy day, and look forward to speaking soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for sharing your time with me today and for having me here. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, ASA Newland. We really appreciate it. Now we're going to transition to Paulie. We have so many questions to ask you as well, because you are doing great work as Senior Advisor to the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and as the Director of Tribal Affairs. You dedicated your career to Indigenous and Native communities, even minoring in Native American Studies in college. Tell me about what drives your passion and dedication to this work.
Thanks, Renee. And, I think for me, it's fairly simple. From my tribe in the Pueblo Poacan, northern New Mexico, was born and raised in my community. And I really got to, that helped to shape and cultivate the community and the communities that I was interested in serving. Ultimately, throughout my career, I think expanding what I understood as Indian country bigger than my own small tribe in New Mexico, but really across our United States and the 570 plus federally recognized tribes across the country. I think there's an important responsibility that we all serve, Assistant Secretary Newland and all the federal officials, to uphold our trust and treaty responsibility, and a responsibility that we all take very seriously. So the passion comes from being able to engage with tribal leaders, being able to hear their stories, hear their priorities, and understand the ways that we can help to fulfill our trust responsibilities to help really empower those communities and drive self-determination, which is a key tenet of our administration's priorities in working with tribal nations, as well as ensuring that we can support our next generation. So a lot of the work that we do is forward-leaning and looking to our future. So in all the ways that we do our work, we think about our 7 generations ahead of us. And so I think it really provides a good grounding in the work that we do, and helping to think about the future, but understanding our responsibility today to carry that forward.
Wow. Well, it is very impactful. So thank you for all the work you do. And just extending that a little bit further, now that, you're inside the White House, you're working on policy and so many different initiatives. Can you tell us some of the work that is unique that you do, that you guys are working on at the White House that, impacts the community that you have so much passion for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the important sort of smaller things, but it's a larger concept to understand about where I'm placed in the White House is I'm in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, which recognizes tribes as governments. And I think that's really important in the way that we fulfill our nation-to-nation relationship with our tribal leaders. Some of the big things that we've been able to work on was standing up our White House Council on Native American Affairs, chaired by Secretary Holland and Ambassador Rice. And really that's our large interagency policy committee with 6 subcommittees focused on different issue areas, chaired by different secretaries and other administration leadership. Actually, yesterday, Assistant Secretary Newland participated and led our engagement on tribal homelands initiatives with Secretary Holland and Secretary Vilsack and the Deputy EPA Administrator. So, we were really interested in ensuring that tribes have the access to the highest levels of government, and really ensuring that that dialogue is had between leader and leader. The other interesting piece, I think the president has made clear that tribal consultation is a top priority of this administration. He signed the presidential memorandum on day 6 of his administration, making clear that each agency is to not only consult with tribes, but to consult with tribes on the plan to consult with tribes. So that was obviously a very large lift on our end to, as the government staffing up, and to be educating our colleagues about why this is important. The history, but also I think in the fulfillment of our collective duty, it's not just the tribal staff or the tribal positions within the administration that have that trust responsibility. It's really everybody. So I think those were some of the big sort of impactful things that we were able to do very early on, culminating in our Tribal Nations Summit at the end of the year in November. We had the president, the vice president, the first lady, and 13 cabinet secretaries focused on tribal issues over the course of a day and a half. So that was a commitment made by the president early on in his campaign days, and something that we were happy to fulfill, and something that we're looking forward to carrying forward again this year, this time hopefully in person. And I think that this is something that was held every year of the Obama administration, and it was always the sight to see, to have tribal leaders from representing over 570 communities out here and living that nation-to-nation relationship. So those are some those that I think that we're incredibly proud of, something that we look forward to in the work this year. And so those are some of the highlights of it, without getting into the nitty-gritties.
Well, I mean, those are some pretty impactful and amazing highlights. I mean, that conference, that is held in November, I know a lot of people are probably excited about it. And of course, this is a small business, resource webinar. Just want to know, last year, as you guys were talking about, what was being done for the community, what small business resources, were sort of like uplifted during that conversation, if you recall, or if you guys are talking about anything to be done for small business owners within the community.
Yeah, no, I think I would probably lean on our agency partners who are doing a lot of that work. Brian shared a number of ways that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is partnering across the agency. The SBA, we have Commerce, we have the Economic Development Agency within Commerce. And I think with, our large infrastructure bill that dedicated over $13 billion directly to tribal governments, there's a lot of opportunity, and everything from water infrastructure to broadband, to roads. I think, we want to be very intentional about creating equity across our administration. One of the ways that we did that was by creating not only the infrastructure guidebook, but a specific guidebook for tribal governments to navigate and really lay out all the resources of the infrastructure law. Of course, the American Rescue Plan provided over $31 billion to tribal governments. So there's a lot of, I think, a lot of infusion of resources into the community, not only to help tribal communities weather the impacts of the COVID pandemic, whether the health impacts, whether the economic impacts, but also, began to address some of their systemic and longstanding challenges with infrastructure that, hopefully this bill will help to bring some energy to and really catalyze a new era for our communities. So that's what I think, direct folks' attention to at the agencies that are helping to administer all these amazing programs. But I would also direct you all to look at the bill.gov website, which has the tribal playbook, and you can look in detail where all the opportunities exist.
Wow, that's very helpful. Okay, one last thing before we let you go. How can people engage, get connected with the work of the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs and connect with you?
Absolutely. So I want to give a big shout out to our team here in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. We're led by the fearless and amazing Julie Rodriguez, who was recently appointed as the assistant to the president and a senior advisor, and has been serving since the beginning of the administration as the director of Intergovernmental Affairs. So she leads our team. We have all our colleagues who handle our governors, municipal governments. We have state and local county governments. We have everything that, I think our office is really the connective tissue within the White House that deals with state and local tribal governments, territorial governments. So we have our listserv that I'd encourage people to sign up. And Renee, I'm not sure if you can pass that around, but we can make sure to get that to you folks. I have my own tribal listserv.